Bienvenue de la part de AFUSA to this extraordinary presentation.
Thank you.
On Christian Dior, Destiny, the authorized biography. Next slide, Melissa. So before we start this presentation, I just wanted to remind everybody who signed up that we have our apéro group, our Demystifying the French, a panel discussion on January 29th. Servir la France napoléonienne at Washington avec Luc Delambre on February from the 12th, and the Art of Translation with Sandra Smith. We're also going to sneak in a fabulous presentation of how to make the speech to Noel in December. So stay tuned.
There and where you had it before, with it lying down.
So a couple of logistics, and if everybody would please mute themselves because I'm already hearing some voices in the background. So please stay on mute during the presentation. Use the chat feature for submitting questions for the question and answer period. Select speaker view, and in the event of rare and unusual technical issues, sign back in a couple of minutes using the original link that Melissa sent everyone. This event is being recorded, and we will have a total runtime of approximately 1 hour. So just a brief introduction on Marie-France, an award-winning expert on style, fashion, and the luxury market. Marie-France is the recognized authority on Dior. She's the author of several landmark biographies, including Maison Dior's founder, Marcel Boussac, Gianni Agnelli, and Nina Ricci. She once said to Vogue magazine, "What interests me is the interaction between a given background and enterprise and the man behind it." Next slide. We also want to introduce Kate Mascara. If it wasn't for Kate and if it wasn't for the two of us meeting, we wouldn't have this incredible presentation with Marie-France. She is originally from New York and Boston, where she began her publishing career at Little Brown and Harvard Business School Publishing. After leading luxury bike tours in French wine country, she joined Flatiron in 2002. Her mission is, as editorial director of books in English, is to bring French culture to the world through beautiful books, very much the same mission as the Alliance Française worldwide. So I just wanted to say, as we welcome Marie-France, I'd just like to add un grand merci, bienvenue, and thank you so much for sharing the details of the fascinating book on Christian Dior and the background behind the man renowned as the architect of the new look, whose groundbreaking fashions brought style and joy back to the streets of Paris and to the world. So welcome, Marie-France.
Thank you. So pleased to be with you.
To get started, I think what would be really interesting to share with the members who are watching today is this book has had a long story with you. It was 25 years ago that you first started working on the previous iteration of the book, the first edition. And now, 25 years later, you've spent quite a bit of time thinking about the book and the man. And I just wonder if you want to tell us what it was that made you want to rewrite the text, to get in there and do a new edition.
I have a very simple answer, my admiration from him, perhaps even more admiration today than I had for the first time. And we all have met extraordinary people in our life, but no one quite like Christian Dior. Given the ups and downs and the difficulties he met in his life, I think we can say that what he did with his life is quite admirable. And he's really someone who has, his part was definitely contributed to his destiny. This is the title of the book, and I think this is what it says about him. So I'm very, very pleased to introduce you to Christian Dior. Destiny contains the meaning that you are inspired by an ideal. On the opposite, people who are indifferent cannot be expected to have an ideal. So in his case, it was for him, it was not clear from him since the beginning. It took time to prove himself that he had a destiny, or in the case that he could find his ideal. But when the time came, and when he caught up, when the time came when he could at last become a designer, as he wanted to, his influence went far beyond leaving an imprint on fashion like other designers. What he did was to sublimate fashion in an art of living and give it the dimension of a culture. And if we still talk about him today, I don't think it's because Dior, it may not be one of the reasons, but I don't think it's the unique reason that why Dior is one of, it's not, the reason is not, it's not because Dior is the most powerful luxury brand in the world. No, I think it is because Christian Dior is an authentic artist and that he performed something absolutely imaginable. The new look represents a date in our history. We remember this date. This date is marked in our history. And if we think of this famous quote by Dostoevsky, beauty will save the world, this is exactly what Christian Dior did on February 12, 1947, with the collection that he called Corolle, but the name was changed, as we know, to the New Look by an American fashion journalist, and it was adopted universally. The New Look was a peaceful revolution, but a revolution nonetheless, which answered the desire of millions and millions of people around the world to forget about the war, about the bombs, about the poverty, and living anew and breathing life fully. So when did Christian Dior, you may have asked me, and I may ask myself, I did ask myself, did Christian Dior have an inkling that he had a destiny? It's hard to say, but the most important feature, he said himself that the most important feature, he wrote his memoirs also, and it's a book that I should have quoted right from the beginning because I used the book and I inspired myself of the book. It's not exactly an autobiography, it's his story in the fashion business and creating the house of the Maison Couture. But as a preamble in the book, he says this: the most important feature in my life has been my good luck. I must render homage to the fortune tellers who predicted it. It's still mysterious. It's not really an answer, but you can see that there is something there, and we know because everybody who knows Christian Dior knows that he had a thing with astrology. He was superstitious. He had a lot of little games. He believed in lucky numbers. Number 8 was his favorite number. 12 also was another favorite number. He played cards. He carried keepsakes in his pockets, and he would not take an important decision without consulting the astrology. So that may say, because of his kind of supernatural link with the supernatural, he felt that he had something special to do, or he had something special to realize.
Do you want to tell the story about the carnival right from his childhood, which was
the carnival?
When his first fortune teller experience?
It's a bit of a too long story. We have so many things to say. We don't want to overspend your time. So I may say it at the end when we have time, but otherwise it's true. It's a very amusing fashion. And as you are pushing me to say it, I will say it in a more quick way. The first time he made a fortune teller when he was 12. It was at the end of the First World War in 1918. And they were doing all sorts of things to thank the soldiers for their courage. And there was a feast for the courage. And he met a fortune teller, and that fortune teller asked him to sort of sell a few trinkets for him. And in the end, he said, "You've been so kind. I want to do something for you. Do you want to show me your palm? And I write you what your life is about." And the answer left Christian Dior a bit perplexed because she said, "You're going to travel extensively, but women are going to make you extremely rich." So for a long time, it remained a conundrum. We only know that it is true. And the fortune teller was right.
And he was a child. He was an adolescent.
He was an adolescent, absolutely. So Christian Dior was born on January 21st, 1905. And he was born in a family who was quite well-to-do in a place called Granville. Granville was a very active harbor in Normandy. Normandy was one of the provinces in Paris that was fairly rich, with people fairly active. And it was really facing, miles and miles away England. You could see shores of England, not shores of England, but islands belonging to England, which is the Ile Jersey and the Ile Guernesey. And that's one of the islands that Christian Dior and his parents sort of used to go on having a picnic and things like that. So the 3 generations of Dior had built a fortune by importing guano from Peru. It's not very, 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 very attractive. and manufacturing it into fertilizers, and they became the most important producer in France, which at that time was going through an extraordinary economic boom. It was a time which was known and being that of the rise of the bourgeoisie, and which produced the splendor of the well-known, the Belle Époque, the forgotten Belle Époque. Christian Dior fantasized about, we should move our slides, no? Can we
sure, Melissa, do you want to show this, the PowerPoint?
Voila, which we are going to stop on the house of Granville that I was describing, which was the house created by Madame Dior, who had high ambitions and who turned this garden, which is the house looks over the sea, this garden by the sea, into something of a tropical garden. She was so crazy, she was so inspired by flowers that she had a collection, extraordinary collection. If you move to the next slide, you will see what Christian Dior thought about his childhood. My memory holds a picture of a time full of happiness, exuberance, and peace, in which everything was directed toward the art of living. The future, it seemed, could hold only greater comfort for everybody. No matter what life has granted to me, nothing will ever recall the sweet memory of that period. Christian Dior fantasized, as you can see, Christian Dior fantasized about his childhood. His description in his memoirs speak of his enchantment about the Villa Les Rums. It was called the Villa Les Rums. His mother had great ambitions about the house, and for him it was a world of wonders. The property, she was devoting her time to creating a magnificent garden, and Christian Dior, as of the age of 5, was constantly moving the feet of her mother, following her in the garden, learning the name of the plant, insisting that she would buy a catalog, rushing when the postman was coming and he knew the catalog of the new plants was coming, he would be the first one to rush, open the book, bring it to his mother and say, oh, we should plant this, we should do this plant, we should plant this plant, we should do this one. And this turned into a passion. His childhood turned for him into a life passion for gardening, combined with, as you can guess, with an adoration for his mother. We should go to the next slide. This is Madame Dior as she was at a young age, just about when she was married. You can move to the next one. We will see the children. You can see they're still very young. Christian is the little one in the middle. His sister next to him is called, she's not Catherine, she is Justine. And then the little boy on his left, the elder brother, is called Raymond, and he was born 3 years before him. Right. We're going to continue with the portraits. I think there are more. Yes, so nothing fired Christian Dior's imagination more than the carnival. The carnival was a tradition of Granville as a shipping harbor dating back to 1874. And at the time that the sailors sailed out to Newfoundland and came back months later, there was a carnival. So there were basically 2 carnivals a year to absolutely manifest the joy of seeing the boats coming back. And the little children were sort of presented as kings and, in this kind of little chariots. And if we continue on another image, which we will see soon, yes, the latest thing which had been installed in the beginning of 1920 was earlier than that, 1880, was the casino, because Granville was a very elegant resort. Let's continue with the slide for the moment. Now, here is another portrait of the family later. You can see Raymond now is about age 18. Christian is age about 18, that makes him 15, something like that. And you have another brother that was born that is in between Raymond and the other sisters of Justine. And you see the last little girl who was born, Catherine, who was just 3 at the time. This is quite the moment of the family being very splendid. Let's continue with the slide. Christian Dior here is 18 years old. You can see he's very slim. he has a bit, in French, you would say a Pierrot la Lune expression. Can you translate that?
Well, it's just a moon face. A moon face.
A moon face, yeah. Yes. Really, and you can see him descending. The house is a staircase that goes down to the beach, and he's using that staircase. Let's continue. And so here you see him like a lizard. The body like a lizard on the beach, on the sand, is Christian Dior, surrounded by this group of friends. Friends that he will keep all his life. The woman who is the most solid in the middle is called Suzanne Lulling, and she will end up directing the salons at Dior. The others are her sisters. She will also have a role at Dior. And Dior was very good at lying down. At sports, he was a bit less good. Let's continue.
Friendship too.
Voilà. And the thing that fascinated, that enchanted Christian Dior, and when in fact his talent sort of starting to manifest itself, was you see this series of dresses. They were dresses that he designed specially for his group of girlfriends for the carnival. And you see it very 1920s, it's very sort of casino and all that kind of thing. Let's continue. Let's continue. Yes, we arrive now at the time where Christian Dior has, we are at the years 20. We have passed, in fact, without feeling it, because I didn't mention it, there were 4 years of war, 1914, 1918, where the family had grown, as you've seen, to 5 children with Bernard and Catherine, the last born, and they've moved, but during the time after the war, they moved to Paris in a large apartment, Granville remaining as a summer house. So on that slide, Christian Dior is still an adolescent. Oh no, I was not looking at the right slide. The slide on the left, there is absolutely Maurice Sachs is a writer. Au Bœuf sur le Toit is the name of a bar which existed in Paris. You see the picture of this bar on the image on the right in the low part. And this has been created by a group of people, and it became the place to be seen. It attracted an extraordinary mix of people, youngsters like Christian Dior, who came with his friends, who were all young would-be writers, would-be illustrators, would-be pianists, would-be musicians. At the time, they were just admiring the two. If we can distinguish the characters which are on the engraving above the piano bar, you see, in fact, the people that are considered to be the gods of that particular period. Alors, the gods are, I think the gods, I don't have their name.
We see Picasso on the right,
we
Cocteau.
See Picasso, Cocteau. We see, who do we see? Well,
it's right here, it's on the slide.
No.
Max Jacob,
yes, we see Max Jacob,
Stravinsky,
the poet Max Jacob, the music composer Stravinsky, Jean Cocteau, Francis Poulenc, who was one of the group of 5, Darius Milhaud, also a musician, part of the group of 5, and Pablo Picasso. And for Dior, nothing then came just as he was. This is the place where Christian Dior would spend every night if he could, when he was discovering Paris for the first time. Because in fact, Paris in the 20s was, let's see what my notes are.
This is where he started to be able to show his own personality. He was kind of breaking away from what his family expected from him.
Certainly breaking away, certainly leading his own little life. I've been part of this group of friends who all were aspiring to be artists. And Paris they discovered in the 20s was a cultural shock. Women, as you remember, women's hair were cut short. The music is black, or the music was, well, the music is black. They say that's where the ballets are Russian. The paintings is abstract, and everyone's mind is being psychoanalyzed. The artistic scene was in full bloom. We went from the surrealist to the Dadaist to Cubist, and the scene is so colorful that nightclubs are full every night. Josephine Baker is a star there, and there is a sense of starting afresh, a lightness of being. for this new generation. And Christian Dior stuck for quite a number of years with his group of friends who remained friends all his life. And they all became, in fact, they all made names for themselves under the glory of Picasso, Max Jacob, and Picasso and Max Jacob and Jean Cocteau. That was them. And so the next one that we are going to have, so what was great, well, yes, and that's a portrait of Christian Dior in the 20s, and you can see also he still is not completely, you can see that he has not taken this destiny in hand. He's a bit hazy, he's a bit hesitant. His friends find him timid, and his friends are quite surprised because most of them have their talents that come to appear, and they strengthen themselves. And you can see that Christian Dior seems to be always happy staying in the backstage, not exactly in the backstage because he's amusing, he intervenes, he has ideas, he makes funny remarks, he's full of wit, but he's not really full of life in terms of being like them, ready to, for instance, as an example, he was playing piano extremely well. He had asked his parents to give him piano lesson. He was playing extremely well. And one evening, he had organized kind of a session, a music session at his parents' house. All the lights were dark. Everybody had composed, all of his friends had composed a piece of music, and his friend Soget started playing, and he had composed something. Dior, in his turn, sort of played what he had composed on the piano. Everybody applauded. And when they asked what were the title of these works that both had played, they each had fallen on the same name, Les Françaises. And Dior, when he saw something like that, had the impression that he would never reach out to the talent of Soget. So that was something that took him a long time to sort of empower himself. We have another, can we move the slide? This is just, this corresponds to another period of his life. It doesn't come exactly on time, but after, well.
Talk about maybe what his parents expected of him and then how he...
You're right, yeah. You're asking me the right questions. But what his dream was, instead, well, after saying, in fact, that he had not expressed what was his desire in life, he had one. But he had to keep it back because once he expressed it to his parents, they immediately said, oh my God, no, you're not going to be an architect. This is such a haphazard career. I think they probably confused architect with a painter like Gauguin was, Van Gogh, who of course was the one that all parents give as an example of what not to follow. But so at a certain point, what he did is that he convinced his father. It was hard for him to see his father refuse that he would take on the profession of architect, but he had to accept because at that time he did. And his parents had asked him instead to follow the School of Political Science, which was really not his cup of tea. And in a way, he did not really, he took it by compromise, but he continued his wanderings with his friend and his crazy life all around Paris, making himself, in fact, an extraordinary sort of learning and experience and culture, and creating and having, educating his taste, educating his sense of beauty. And that will serve him later. And when he failed political school, we could move actually perhaps on the next slide. Then we continue then with experience when he had a gallery. We can continue after because there is another one. Yes, he exposed a lot of his friends. He loved having a gallery because he could be surrounded by many artists that were already his friends. So it was a great fun business, but unfortunately it ended in 1934, when crisis hit Paris. The stock market, the stock market crack in New York in 1929 for Americans only reached out, its consequences reached out Europe only in 1931, 1933. Let's continue.
Yeah,
let's continue. Voilà. you're going to see the pergola affair is something I'm not going to be able to go into, but we're going to see, if we go to the next slide, we will see what talent Christian Dior had as a would-be architect. He designed this pergola to please his mother. The pergola was situated, and it was one of the most interesting spots now in the Villa Les Rams. It was so pleasant to have tea, to have evening where you could play music. So it was an enchanting thing. And in fact, in spite of having created something like that, it rather sort of contraried his mother. His mother didn't want him to do a profession that was that of an artist. She was a bit limited in her views, and she thought that it was a dangerous career. And in fact, she would have taken pride in having his son as an ambassador. So this did not happen. And this, in fact, was certainly a hang-up for Christian Dior. Let's continue because we have so many things to say. And yeah, here we go. Here we go. After the pergola. Being born, you see the title, which announces bad news. 1931 was the year I was talking about. Being born with a silver spoon in your mouth is not a guarantee for life. And the year 1931 was a tragedy for the Dior family. Christian Dior had actually a bad omen when returning to Paris. It was just after the summer holidays in Granville. And as he entered in the apartment, he noticed that a mirror had crashed on the floor with pieces of glittering glass spread away. He immediately thought, 7 years bad luck, 7 years bad luck coming with us. And what followed, in fact, confirmed his premonitions. His mother's death, first of all. Madeleine Dior had been diagnosed with a tumor which required surgery, and a month later she died of sepsis. Dior adored his mother. Her death, he wrote, left indelible marks on me. Then Maurice Dior, greatly affected by the loss of his wife, discovered that he was ruined. As I was saying, the stock market crash in New York hit Europe a year later or two, and he had made important real estate investments financed on bank loans, and suddenly the banks were calling for the guarantees. His stock actions in the business were worth nothing. The situation was ultimately without mercy. And then it was really as if the family had been caught in an avalanche. Madeleine Dior's death revealed her secret pain. This pain had a name, Bernard, her last son, her third son. When he was still a young boy, friends who would see him described him as having an angel face, yet something went wrong with him after his baccalaureate, and he became unstable, violent, sometimes illuminated, going through phases of cyclothymia. He became dangerous for his entourage, and the doctors prescribed that he should be set. He needed treatments, but in the end, he was sent to an institution. And when his mother's death happened, it worsened his condition. He finally went to, if we could have the next, let's continue, not this one, let's continue. This is the stock market. You see the face of this is the face of Bernard Dior. This is the face of Mrs. Dior at the time that she was bearing secretly the pain caused to her by Bernard. Let's continue to the next image, which is a sad one. It's Bernard, and it's the house in which he will end up finishing his life. He died only 30 years after he was hospitalized there. Let's continue because it's very sad. And we're going to see images of Raymond. Raymond was Raymond was the elder. You can see him in his attire of soldier, and one is posing in the Villa Les Rams, is fairly elegant, and the other, he seems to have received some bullets. But Raymond was a gifted, intelligent person, but he squandered his life. Consequence, perhaps, of an abrupt decision that marked him when he was too young. He engaged himself, he volunteered for the front under the age of 18. 18 was when you were supposed to do it, but he was by patriotism, he volunteered. And the experience that he lived through was absolutely abominable. He returned traumatized, because he was part of the Battle of the Somme, which was, well, for the French know, one of the worst and the most sanglant battle that existed, bloody that existed. And he was the only surviving member of his squad. He became an anti-war militant, which is understood, but he also developed a sarcastic and rebellious nature, and even the lovely woman he married could not alter his character. Maurice Dior, let's continue, let's finish talking. If we can move the next slide. This picture represents the marriage of Raymond Dior and Madeleine Dior, his wife. So this one was a happy moment. Let's continue. And we will see, and so Maurice, well, there's just no end to the problems of family. And there was one that we have missed a slide there, which is Christian Dior himself, because there was a mother, there was a children. It's coming after the Enlightenment. Well, it's not exactly in this order. Yes, the last of all to have also been affected, like the family, in this sort of terrible tragedy of the family, was also Christian Dior, because he was left, of course, penniless. He lived, his friends always supported him, but he was very discreet and very dignified, very digne, as we say,
dignity. Yeah.
Had a lot of dignity in hardship. And so he preferred, instead of borrowing friends' apartments, which he did from time to time, he lived in a little sort of garret where the windows were not well sealed, and during the winter you could become very sick. He tried to find jobs, but the crisis was all over. So he not only had to close the gallery, but he couldn't find a job. And then in the end, after a few months, he was sitting on a bench in the street, and he was just resting for a minute, and he coughed. And when he coughed, he realized that his handkerchief was stained with blood. He knew it. He had tuberculosis. So tuberculosis was at that time the most dreaded disease you could have. At that time, you had not discovered vaccination against that, and there was also no social security. Fortunately, his friends, 10 of his friends, decided to reunite together and collect the money necessary to send him in a sanatorium. And they picked a very good place, probably one of the best places in the world to get cured, which was in the Pyrénées-Orientales, in Font-Romeu. It took him a year to be cured, but he was cured in the end. So we are going to see that now he's going to breathe a little bit, but when he comes back, well, let's continue with the slides, because enlightenment was the fact that he discovered that he had so much strength in himself. I'm going to quote something that I've got to find here, but Christian Dior had something. Christian Dior in hardship has this very precious quality. His reaction to his reaction in front of hardship is an indication of his incredible love of life, which began in childhood. A love paired, he had an aversion. One could notice that he had an aversion to unhappiness that drove him to still search instinctively a way out. It was most of the time in nature, in traveling, in being with friends. But he kind of sort of, comment dire, on tient le mal au bout du stake. It was like, people had noticed that he was always very particular with adversity. In adversity, he would not mention it, he pretended not to see it. He was putting it really at the end of a stick.
He was an eternal optimist.
And he was an optimist. He loved life. He loved life, in fact, in spite of the fact that these years we're talking about did not show that. So this is the sanatorium he was in, and he showed a tremendous amount of pragmatism and self-organization, because he decided not to live in a sanatorium, which was, in spite of the friends paying for the cure, he wanted to keep, he wanted to be he was very thrifty. And so he decided to live in the village down, to first of all have a bit more of autonomy, and not to be also suffering from what everybody suffers when you are in a sanatorium, which is absolutely moral decline. So he avoided that. Let's continue. Let's continue with the slides. This is during his tuberculosis. He had connected before leaving. That also shows how he can fight against hardship. He had connected with this very kind priest, Maurice Morel, who was both priest. He had two vocations, that of a priest, but that of a painter. And he was a friend of Max Jacob. And he really had an extraordinary life. I won't go into it afterwards, but Dior had a correspondence with his priest for about during all the time of his cure. And this very good priest helped him to build up his morale, to not completely despair, to still believe in God, to do not consider that he was punished. There was also the problem, if we have just 1 minute on this subject, Dior was a homosexual. And at that time, in this particular generation and society, still very Victorian, you had to hide yourself. So he was also, Christian Dior at a certain time was asking him questions. Was he punished for his homosexuality? And the priest was very intelligent. He was a Jesuit, and he led him to find peace, to find confidence, and to reconquer his own sort of confidence in life and in himself. And so, in fact, when he ended the cure, he was completely repaired. Let's continue with the slides. Let's continue moving the slide. This is just a moment where he was in the sanatorium, and he's as the visit of one of his wonderful friends, Jean Ozen, who is going to welcome him when he has finished his cure and when he returns to Paris. We will hear this character again. Let's continue. So you can see that at this particular turn point, when he's cured from his tuberculosis and he returns to Paris in September 1936, full of confidence now, you can see that now, you can consider that he can now face his future. The unhappiness is behind him, and he can look at the future. And these are just a few quotes of his friends that have seen how Christian Dior evolved in spite of all the hardship and the difficulty he lived in. He had kept his spirit. So the one is from an actress who was his niece, Geneviève Page, and she said, "Godfather is a good example of one who could be financially ruined and still elegant." The next one is Henri Sauguet, his musician friend, saying misfortune did not make him a poor man and actually taught him a great deal. The next one is James de Coquet, who was a critic of the Figaro, who considered that Christian Dior was just admirable in the sense that he always kept his peace of mind, and also his own sort of self-guidance. He was keeping the right measure between being proud and being humble. He was just, and with everybody, he treated them all the same way. He was a very human person. Let's continue. There's another quote, I believe. Yes. And let's just finish. You can read the quotes, but I want to just finish with the last one, which is so promising, which comes from his sort of guide and master, Jean Cocteau, having definitely detected the qualities that Christian Dior had in himself. And as this quite amusing sort of cubist twist, a magical nib that contains those of God and Dior. Let's continue. That's a picture which was a very good news. When he returned to Paris, he had a lot of unsold paintings that were left at the gallery. And the first news he received is from a friend in New York who tells him, "I have sold this picture for a very good price, and you're going to receive the check very soon." So Christian Dior was delighted. The painting represents by Dufy, very pricey picture, and it represents the plan of Paris. Let's go to the next slide. So Christian Dior, when he came back, was really welcomed by his friends. Let's go to the next slide. Oh, no, this is not the one. I wanted to show him. No, I will speak. This announces you, and it's almost timely, that Christian Dior is finally getting out of the hole and finding his way into fashion. But before that, of course, he had to learn a little bit because he was not a born couturier. And what was wonderful, and that's what that showed, the friendship that he gave and the friendship that he received. Jean Ozen, who we had seen on one of the previous slides, and who had visited him in Font-Romeu when he was doing his cure, and immediately said, while waiting for Christian Dior, immediately said, come and live in my apartment. I have an extra room. You'll have a wonderful view on the Eiffel Tower. Plus, I'm living with a friend who is American, who is very talented, called Max Kenna. And Max Kenna is a designer, so he will teach you how to start. And that's really what happened. I mean, in the space of a few weeks and months, Christian Dior was so good at it, so involved, so determined, so hardworking, that he started to start really picking the thing. He just saw it. He just had, the talent was unknown, the talent was uncovered and undiscovered, but it was there. And his friend McKenna was also able at one point to sell some of his designs. At this time, the newspaper, the magazine, the fashion magazine, didn't use photos as much as they use today. They used engraving, they used designs. Illustrations, exactly. So Max Kenna came back very proud and said, I've sold your illustrations, and here is a check of 100 francs. And Christian Dior was absolutely amazed. And he said, these are the first money I ever earned with my own creative talent. And he was very moved. And from then on, the story goes very fast. His friends realize that he's talented, so introductions come. He's introduced to this designer that you can see called Piguet, not the most interesting couturier, but nevertheless, that's sort of starting at school. Now, unfortunately, we have to face another difficulty in France, another problem in France that will sort of slow down his progress. We're going to see that on the next slide, I think. No, this brings another story. I've not had time yet to talk about Catherine, who was his beloved sister. And Catherine was unfortunately also a victim of the family problems because she was 12 when the father's bankruptcy came. And at that time, the father and the daughter had to go down he took his retreat in a small house that he had actually bought for the nanny when the nanny took her retirement. And the house was in an absolutely picturesque village, Calion in the south of France. The problem was not there. The nature was beautiful. The sky was blue. The temperature was warm. You had vegetables. You could grow vegetables. You could grow fruits. You could grow flowers. So they were not unhappy. But in any case, they were living very poor. And for instance, I'm coming back to the story of the Dufy that Dior was so happy to have sold. All of the money of the Dufy went immediately to provide some resources to his father and his sister. And in 1934, when Dior was working for Piguet, when we saw the couturier on one of on the slide before, his sister, he brought his sister to Paris. He wanted to show her, he wanted her to start working in fashion. And she actually lived with him in an apartment he was able to buy himself with the first earnings he made for Piguet. So that was a happy time. Then the war came. Let's continue with the slides. So this is Jean Ezel, the friend who welcomed him in his apartment. This is Christian Bérard, Christian Dior's alter ego, who was a great artist. They had tremendous fun together. They were always together. People, when they saw them, they said, oh, here come the two Christians. Oh, here come the two Christians again. Where are the two Christians today? They were kind of the talk of the town or the talk of the tone in their group. Let's continue on the next slide. And the portraits of his other friends, Max Jacob, that's rather a painting, and Jean Cocteau, who was quite good looking with piercing eyes. Let's continue. So, yes, that's what I was waiting to find as a slide. Unfortunately, war came in between, the war of 1939. Dior was mobilized. We will see a picture of him on the next slide as a soldier. No, this is just an announcement of the war. Yes, you can see Dior in the group of soldiers. He was mobilized, but fortunately, you know, France was divided in two. There was the North Zone that was really occupied by the Germans, and the South Zone in which Dior was, which was not occupied by the Germans at that time. In the end, they finally invaded the whole of the country. So there he found himself on something that he liked, which was on duty farm, because as most of the soldiers had to be engaged in the war, women or their children or their associates were left without, you know, labor people. So people, and so Dior enjoyed this time tremendously. Oh, we couldn't find a better job than the one of tilling the ground, bringing back the hay, making sure and sort of sleeping, comme on dit en français, à la belle étoile,
under the stars.
Under the stars, and whatever. Let's continue. So this was a happy time for him, curiously, strangely enough. And then he joined his family in the village after his demobilization. He was able to join his family who was in the village of Callion. You have a beautiful picture of the village of Callion, which is overlooking the plain of Grasse, and which is certainly one of the most beautiful spots in France. The little house that Catherine and her father lived in had improved. They now had electricity, and it's when I visited it myself, because Catherine invited me to spend a night and a day with her, it was absolutely charming. She had made renovations and she had a wonderful taste, the sense, of course, like inherited from her mother, of flowers, beautiful objects. So it was absolutely charming. So at that time, you can say it was one of the few moments of rest that Dior had. In spite it was during the war, but he was living hidden and protected from it. And he was quite happy not to also face the horrors of the occupation.
This is when he sells his illustrations as well. He walks for miles and miles.
I know, exactly. So at that time, there was a colony of artists and magazines and movie people who resided in the south of France because it was demobilized and tried to continue to make films or to edit newspapers or to continue their work of illustration. It was one of them was a friend of Dior called René Gruot. And Dior was one day, there was a phone call, and a journalist from the Figaro said, "We need you. Would you be able to do a number of illustrations for the Figaro? And we will post them as soon as you have finished." So he did them in no time, because now he was so adept and so deft at it that he could do it with the left hand. And he wrote a kind of a volume of a number of designs that kept this woman absolutely aghast. Aghast. She said, "But you've done a whole collection." So that shows how Christian Dior was, you know, such an extraordinary talent. And so determined to do things. Let's continue. Let's keep that beautiful, let's leave that beautiful village. So after a certain time, Dior stayed as long as possible, and he could in Callion to be with his sister and to help her with the gardening. The garden of flowers was changed to a garden of vegetable, and he went also with a little sort of chariots that he had to sell peas and to sell vegetables to Cannes or to the next city. But so now he had to go back to Paris because he had a job, and this job was really his great chance to enter into the world of couture, not just as an apprentice, but as a star. Do we have a signal? No, there's someone. And this represents one of the most outstanding couturiers that we've had in France. He was a president of the Chambre syndicale. His name was Lucien Lelon, and he's remembered to have had an extraordinary sort of intelligence and determination to resist the pretension of the Germans to import the whole of French couture to Berlin. It was an idea of Goebbels, and the government of Vichy, who was quite weak, with the of course, the occupants, was kind of mingling into this and did not know how to get out of the situation. And Lucien Lelong, whom you see here, is a kind of a statue of a man who has quite a bit of a stature, sort of decided or asked the French government to send him, that he would go to Berlin, discuss directly with Goebbels, and made a reasoning, an argumentation, which was full of intelligence, but also of guile. And he said, but you know, you also in Germany have an extraordinary sort of couture and talents of designers, of couturiers. So why do you need this? And in any case, if you were to import French couture, you would have to import about 250,000 people, because you don't have just the salons you see in Paris, but behind there is a whole industry. So he won the case. And Christian Dior, by being witness of that, acquired a much larger view of what couture is about, what it means, that it is part of our culture, that needs to be defended, that you want to keep high quality. He had really the opportunity to form himself and have a very, very thorough view of his métier, put it to a higher level. He knew, for instance, that couture had been degraded, the world of couture had been degraded by the fact that there were a lot of bad fortune badly earned in France by people who were what you call the collaborators. And these people, of course, were making money, and their wives wanted to show off. And of course, you know, the couture houses had to sell. So they sold to women who were not really meriting, but deserving to be clients. And Dior was aware of that. Let's continue. My Sister, My Hero. This is a chapter which is, My Sister, My Hero is a chapter which also made Christian Dior shed a lot of tears, because his sister, let's continue with the next slide. His sister was engaged in the resistance, as you can see immediately. Already on the slide is a decoration that she wore, the Medal of War, because of her courage. She was in a network, having fallen in love actually with the head of this network, a great man that she spent her life with afterwards. But because she was arrested, denounced and arrested, Place du Trocadéro one day, she was taken by the Gestapo and tortured in the worst place in Paris, which they have. And I once quote what the treatments were. Some women were even raped. We hope she was not raped, but in any case, it was to that degree. She was there, and she never gave the name of her network. Then she was unfortunately deported to Germany and spent 1 year in a camp with other women. And Christian Dior could not live, could not survive. And he said afterwards that if he survived, it's thanks to the predictions of a fortune teller who absolutely reassured him that she was going to come free. And she came free a year later. So that's another chapter which was really hard to live for him. Let's continue. Let's continue. I don't think I want to stay on that too much. It's Chanel. It's just a milieu that Dior has now joined. Let's continue, because we've already talked about these friends. The lucky star. That's where I wanted to arrive at. The lucky star was when Christian Dior finally met his destiny. We can say that. He met his destiny by founding his own house. Took a number of episodes that we may not have the time to go into. And I think we will jump to the reading that you have to do. It took time for him to start his own house. He started it on the 12th of February, the collection was on the 12th of February, 1947. But it took time for him to start his own house. And he did it by a brilliant dialogue that he had with Marcel Boussac. Marcel Boussac was the equivalent of Bernard Arnault of today. And he was in search of a designer And Dior, having so many friends, was immediately the candidate that was sent to him. But the enjeu, comment est-ce qu'on dit l'enjeu? It was not sure that he was going to convince him. He was a kind of unknown couturier, facing in confrontation meeting with a very important businessman. And he came out having been able to convince Marcel Boussac had his views, of course, on what he thought was going to be done for the resurgence of French couture in Paris. Dior had a completely different view, and we managed to impose his view, and in the end, have Marcel Boussac invest in conditions that were absolutely extraordinary. Dior was afraid that by being let's say, the beneficiary of a loan by Marcel Boussac, he would also lose his independence. Well, when the negotiations that took quite a lot of time, because Christian Dior was very, not astute, but determined to arrive at his own conditions, were excellent for the house of Dior. Never a house had had such a huge investment, 60 million francs. And Dior was the statutory director, therefore he could not be fired. He was sure to stay where he was, and things went very well. So we are going to have a reading of what he produced, which is that extraordinary event, bringing back beauty to the world, and you're going to read it.
Okay. This is just a look into the backstage of a fashion show. And you'll remember the photo of one of his friends on the beach with him from the beginning, Suzanne Luling. This is a quote from her. "It's like a cross between a full dress rehearsal, a tea room, a bullfight, and a court hearing. Everyone bustles about, jostling one another, searching for their seat. It's fragrant, it's talkative, it's frivolous, and yet it's serious, deadly serious. Besides a few friends crammed on the stairs, the participants are judges and are already exhausted from attending a good half dozen similar presentations during the week. They are allowed to write, but not to draw or take photographs. A camera was as dangerous and as unwelcome as a cigarette in an oil refinery. To divulge the secret prematurely was punishable by law." And then everyone stopped talking, as if following a signal known only to the initiated. Paper in hand, the usher could be seen standing before the door that concealed the entrance to the dressing room where the first model would appear. It was 10:30. Dior remained out of sight, hidden behind the curtain. Number one. Marie-Thérèse, the young girl whose potential Dior had spotted when she came for an open audition that day, wore the first design. But terrified, she bungled the first go-around and returned sobbing, incapable of appearing in another dress. It didn't matter. All the audience had seen when her pleated skirt swung open was her remarkable strut. 1, 2, 3 models followed at the same rhythm, twirling a skirt with a 22-yard circumference, hat tilted over an eye, gloved hands. With that walk, that figure, it wasn't a dream, it was her, the embodiment of femininity, unapologetic in her nonchalant disregard for the drama unfolding around her, a creature with voluptuous curves, astounding in her appearance, a combination of folly and elegance, and, above all, sure of herself. She had finally arrived, the much-awaited revived allegory of Paris, an explosive cocktail that recaptured everyone's imagination and took their breath away. Astonished, the ladies watching in their short, straight skirts and square-shouldered jackets plucked unconsciously at the hems of their skirts. Applause broke out and did not stop. 85 dresses were presented from 2 lines, Corolla and Figure 8, which reinvented the proportions of the female body to make it more graceful. Behind his curtain, Christian Dior covered his ears. The torrent of cheers frightened him. The 2 American journalists were enthralled. The performance had far surpassed their expectations. "We were given a theatrical performance such as we had never seen in a couture house before," wrote Bettina Ballard. "We were witnesses to a revolution in fashion and to a revolution in showing fashion as well." The editorial staff of Harper's Bazaar in New York had been in shock since the previous evening when Carmel Snow had telegraphed the message, "Keep a lot of space for Christian Dior in the magazine." She was the first to congratulate the couturier. "It's quite a revolution, dear Christian. Your dresses have such a new look. They are simply wonderful." Before she had even left the building, her famous words began to make their way around the world. A Reuters correspondent had scribbled the phrase on a piece of paper and thrown it down to a messenger on the avenue below. The news reached the United States the very same day. The French press had been on strike for a month, so it was the American and foreign press that had the honor of covering the event. This time, Bettina Ballard didn't skimp on the superlatives. That was what everyone now wanted from Paris. Never had there been a moment more climactically right for a Napoleon, an Alexander the Great, a Caesar of the couture. Paris fashion was waiting to be seized and shaken and given direction. There has never been an easier or more complete conquest than that of Christian Dior in 1947. Carmel Snow struck a most patriotic note. She had the well-earned nickname the French Guard, declaring that Dior saved Paris as Paris was saved in the Battle of the Marne. The American buyers who hadn't believed her and headed back to Le Havre without seeing the collection would have to turn right back around as soon as their ship docked in New York. Christian Dior was ushered into the big salon and welcomed with a storm of applause. His face was soon covered in lipstick marks. As long as I live, whatever triumphs I may win, nothing will ever exceed my feelings at that supreme moment.
Yes, it was a turning moment. What is most amazing that it's the day after it didn't stop. That very day, the 30 Avenue Montaigne was swamped. The invasion did not let up for months. The house was in chaos. The house was in chaos. The women who rushed in wanted all to wear the same suit, which is all to buy the bar suit, the collection signature piece with its cream shantung jacket and peplum that hugged the bodice like a duchess gown and pleated back skirt that flared out in a queenly fashion. Olivia de Havilland bought the passepartout suit, the figure 8. Many of the women ordered the Coraline. Rita Hayworth ordered the soiree evening gown. This was later that she ordered that. It's just not, it was not the day. This is not the day of the, these are days and weeks after by the time the clients had been able to come. But in any case, it shows that it was, the house was taken by storm. Vivian Lee and Laurence Olivier attended the collection viewing, escorted by Christian Bérard, who said, everyone here has a Chicago accent, remarked Scarlett O'Hara at the left. Visitors from London, from Rome, from Buenos Aires, and from Montevideo would rush to the house. For several weeks, London-Paris flights were filled with many more women than men, and Nancy Mitford paved the way, followed closely by her friends. The elegant novelist, a regular at the British Embassy in Paris, found herself short of money from time to time, but she had no hesitation about selling her winter fur to buy Dior coat, wrapping herself in a modern-day Anna Karenina in its voluminous folds that rivaled her need for warmth. Dior had an incredible effect on the elite. But something more and completely unexpected happened, Dior were never intended to cater to a democratic clientele, so his dresses took to the streets. And several weeks later, they were being worn by even more women. He was the most surprised by this runaway phenomenon. In Paris and in the countryside, his style had been adopted by women who usually felt the influence of fashion much later. Before boutiques existed, dressmakers produced ordinary garments and lagged behind the trends in fashion, leaving haute couture in a realm of his own. But Dior's theatrical fashion, which underwent fewer revisions, dressed women of all social classes. It happened that women from all rungs of the social ladder dreamed of playing the femme fatale and the grande dame. The reason why it happened and was so practical, so immediately put in place, was that, first of all, there were two reasons. First of all, during the war, boutiques had sort of, disappeared. But the Singer sewing machine was really the object, the indispensable thing that women were repairing the clothes or making sort of clothes for children out of larger pieces of material, or sort of a lot of curtains were used, actually. And curtains with their lengths were absolutely perfect to create this full skirt of the new look. And that's how the provinces started, covering themselves with women. First of all, everybody was very slim because nobody had eaten much during the war. So everybody was a sort of a cinched waist, exactly corresponding to the new look style. So And despite historic names, another thing also which enchanted Christian Dior and completed to his surprise was that the new look expressed some, the new look also attracted, he had a visit one day of Juliette Greco. Juliette Greco was, you know, she was a muse of what you call the Quartier Latin. She had a sort of a velvety voice, yes. She whose husky, yes. So I'm going to take the sentence again, I missed it. Juliette Greco, the muse of Saint-Germain-des-Prés and an idol to a generation of anti-heroes whose husky, velvety voice sang Si tu t'imagines, or the Tabou au La Rose Rouge, had no qualms about crossing the Seine to go shopping at Vimontaigne. Flattered by Greco's visit, Dior immediately realized what it meant. With rare intelligence, she reconciled the demands of her own individual style with those of my design. Thus, he said with pride, the new look became symbolic of youth and of the future. So, voila. So that's really what we can say about the future. Do we have time? Because there are two new looks, in fact. There is a new look that happened in Paris, which we have recounted. But there is a new look in America when Dior crosses the Atlantic at the invitation of Stanley Marcus to receive the Oscar of the fashion designer. And of course, the scene in America is bewildering itself. So do we have time? It would be another maybe 20 minutes. Or should we just say that we were happy to be together and there will be a next time? Do they think they have it?
Renee, can we continue or should we wrap it up?
You know, Kate, I think it's 10 after 3. I don't know what people's plans are for the afternoon, wherever they may be, but I would hate to lose any of our audience in the event that we continue. Maybe we can have if Melissa can unmute everybody, we can have a raise of hands to see who would like to continue. Melissa, can we do that?
It's a 15, 20 minutes thing.
So everybody who'd like to continue for the next 15 or 20 minutes?
Here? Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, please.
Yes.
Please.
Yes.
Please.
All right. It looks to me, Kate, that we have enough of a group, even if we lose some people, we have enough of a group to continue. But you might want to say, Kate, for those people that might have to leave, where we can buy this book. Is it readily available? And just so if for people that have to sign out, this is the book, and I think we would like you to be able to purchase it at your local bookstore in order to support independent booksellers.
Absolutely, it's widely available. Any of your favorite booksellers will have it.
Okay, so I just want everybody to know that because I'm almost finished with it. It is a brilliant book to read. So why don't we continue with Marie France for those that can stay, and for those that cannot, please buy the book and say goodbye and thank you to Marie France. But those of us who
thank you
stay,
for coming. Thank you to all for coming. I wish
continue.
There will be something in a bookstore, I think, at Rizzoli. No, there will be there will be an event at Rizzoli where I will be there to sign books.
On the 3rd of December.
On the 3rd of December. On the 3rd of December.
In New York.
In New York. In New York downtown, yes. So Dior had never intended to cross the Atlantic, but as a responsible businessman, he could not miss the opportunity to miss his biggest customers on their turf. And also the thought of meeting American women captivated him. And after having, of course, drawn French fashion from its lethargy, you said lethargy or lethargy, we intended to reaffirm the supremacy of Paris fashion. So in September 1947, he boarded the Queen Elizabeth, thrilled to be sailing under the British flag. This is something I've not had the possibility to mention. But if Joe spoke English, it's because he loved the Brits. He had visited them many times. And he loved everything British, even roast beef. So that's what he said. That's what I'm saying. He was pleased also to be traveling with acquaintances who were to become true friends during the sea crossing. There was Eva Pasevich, Alex and Tatiana Lieberman, and Bettina Ballard, the entire team from Vogue. When seeing for the first time the Statue of Liberty, he was overcome with childlike wonder as the first skyscrapers came into view. The zest for life and the self-confidence and the power of the vast American nation where everything seemed to be 100 times larger than life absolutely fascinated him. He had set off on an expedition that would prove to be full of discoveries and surprises, and the first presented itself before he even stepped off the ship. When the passport agent saw the name on his papers, he winked and said, "Well, you're the designer, what's about the skirt's length?" The couturier was astonished, as he had fully expected his arrival would go unnoticed. Christian Dior needed no instruction whatsoever in the art of play acting. He loved it. The United States wanted to meet the great French couturier, and he would give them what they wanted, and was perfect in his role of PR man from the Maison Dior. New York was just a preview of what was to come in Dallas. And in Dallas, because New York was in preview for the reason that this was the homeland of the suffragettes, proponents of practical fashion, protesting all the time. Long skirts are dangerous, you can't even catch a taxi, let alone drive a car. It didn't take too much for activists to conclude that the style was a conspiracy against equal rights of women. Moreover, American women have beautiful figures. Why deform them with these padded hips? And even if you like the narrow waist extolled by the new look, how many women would agree to put up with the torture? Explained one, adding, voilà. Husbands also were drawn into the fight. They said they were outraged by the extravagant expense the new style in this orgy of fabric would cost them. Their brigade called itself the League of Broke Husbands and claimed to have 30,000 members. Never checked. Neiman Marcus, the department store chain founded in 1907, was a legend in his own right. And Stanley Marcus, the company president at the time, was waiting for Dior when he arrived at Dallas Airport. From their very first handshake at the airport, Stanley was thrilled to see that Christian Dior spoke English. He suggested, I interviewed with Stanley, and very kindly, he autographed one of the, he made a foreword to one of the earlier
of Neiman
Marcus. Yes, exactly. And I was in a law firm. I was working in a law firm with his daughter. It was wonderful. I love this family. Stanley recalled the pleasure of his first meeting, during which they discussed contemporary art, painting, food and wine, everything but fashion. And by the time we arrived at his hotel, that's him that I'm quoting, that's Stanley that I'm quoting, I felt as comfortable with him as though I had known him for years. It was the start of a long professional friendship. Stanley Marcus then explained how the award ceremony would proceed the next day, and that night, poor Christian Dior didn't sleep a wink. He was expected to give a speech on a gilded stage, standing before an audience of 3,000 people. Well, he did. After all, he said, what was expected of me? Simply to be or play the part of an eccentric Parisian couturier abroad. I decided this evening that I was going to impersonate a certain character called Christian Dior, a fashion designer who couldn't speak a word of English and yet had to improvise a speech in this language. The audience laughed and applauded. Christian Dior was a huge success. Christian Dior set off to conquer America with this major advantage that he spoke English, and this command of English was particularly useful to Dior at that critical moment when the anti-New Look battle was raging. It kept him from looking like an idiot, and also having Stanley Marcus by his side, who had no qualms about ridiculing the protest. As an example, on September 1st, the collection presentation included several models humorously outfitted in dresses with ribbons, and the ribbons could be adjusted to change the hem length. That was the idea. And while Dior feared the crowd and being thrilled for being written by journalists, although it was less and less, he quickly realized that the controversy played out in the streets and in the newspapers, and the leagues of women eager to insult him and throw him out of the country made for the best kind of advertising. Here, the battle is, that's what he wrote to Jacques Rouet, who was running the house in Paris. Here, the battle is raging over this new look. And it's a wonderful publicity. I don't think our name has ever been as widely known as now. The press ran with it as demonstrations were held. The new look made the cover of all the newspapers where it was debated as a matter of social concern, even the very serious Wall Street. Upon seeing Dior's collection in Paris, Stanley Marcus was the first to realize how the industry could benefit from a radically different style. I had never seen anything so sensational, he said. And the founder, he was, I mean, you know him better than I do, but Neiman Marcus was certainly a practical businessman with a caustic wit and trailblazing authority, and creating the fashion world was certainly a good example. And he had been the first to realize the new look's potential to revive American fashion manufacturing. His judgment echoed that of the powerful journalist Carmel Snow, who had held Christian Dior so high. My friend on 7th Avenue confirmed me that in my belief that American designers did not really come into their own until after the war, when their release from the restrictions of L85, which is a denomination of the law, restriction law, gave them impetus, and their renewed contact with Paris, and the renewed contact with Paris stimulated their imagination. In the land of mass media, Christian Dior was a pro, free of preconceived ideas. He never came across as arrogant. On the contrary, that is again quote that is said also by Stanley Marcus. On the contrary, he observed, he listened, he expressed his gratitude, and let himself be drawn into the game. I'm a self-made man, was one of the off-the-cuff remarks he made to interviewers who were apparently convinced that it was true. He also appreciated the Americans. That's what Dior saying. It's delightfully American to pass naturally from the realm of business contact to that of warm-hearted friendliness. Stanley Marcus, who knew a number of designers, considered Dior to be a cut above the rest, far more cultivated than his peers in literature, history, art, and typography, and thought of him as a man who, like Lucien Lelon, his former patron, his former boss, had a statesman's stature. Betsy, Mrs. Stanley Marcus, was taken with Dior courtesy and finesse, and he became like a member of the family. Neiman Marcus strove to be a showcase for elegance and good taste in the United States, and Dior helped him propagate that image. Christian Dior had suddenly become an ambassador for French culture, and it was the same routine everywhere he went. In San Francisco, in Chicago, except in Chicago, it was an entirely different story. His hosts were obliged to hide him. The train station was crowded with signs bearing the words Christian Dior, go home, and his guys were distraught as if they had all escaped assassination. The designer was amused. My own phlegmatic appearance was the best possible protection. I do not know what sort of mental image my pickets had formed on the hated Dior, but they were probably on the lookout for a pin-up boy. At any rate, I passed through the hall without question, and my stolid Norman looks aroused not the faintest breath of curiosity. I felt almost disappointed. By the end of the trip, however, the new look had definitely won the day. Department stores around the country rolled out the red carpet for Dior. The great American fashion machine had turned in his favor, and everyone congratulated him. The collection came, this is a quote, the collection came at precisely the right moment. It was just like being hungry and finding everything you want to eat right away, said Stella Anania of Magnin. Norman Chesler, another buyer for Magnin, added, Dior was the greatest single source of inspiration for fashion and merchandising. And Andrew Godman, president of Bernard Woodman, was reported to have said, Dior, one of a kind. Not only was he brilliant creatively, but he was a charming man with his feet off the ground. He was like an anchor in stormy seas. So the success was total. It took no more. So it was strange. Where was I there? Yes. But it took no more than 3 months for the clothes to become available, recalled Stanley Marcus, adapted to the needs of American mass production and to the $400 price tag on the Margrave cocktail dress that appeared in the 1947 fall-winter collection. A black dress in wool crepe and fine with low-cut necklines and fitted bodice with cutouts accented with fairly complicated, but the full skirt, typical of the Corolla line, required no less than 16 yards of fabric. But the manufacturers in New York had found a number of ways to work around this. Rayon replaced silk, and the yardage was reduced. First featured in the windows of Beckdorf Goldman and Henry Bendel in New York, the dress was soon copied, recopied, adapted, and readapted, and could be found for $110 with still the same look, but now entirely in rayon. And December, the new look came within everyone's reach at Orbach's, where the Margrave dress could be found for the modest sum of $898. Well, optional. So what would Dior have? What would Dior have? Yes, we do not know what Christian Dior had to say about this phenomenon, whether he was outraged at the transformation necessary to make a new look dress available, or flattered to see it on every corner. Well, practically, in the short term, Christian Dior was in no way concerned to see the Americans appropriate his style according to their own aesthetic and commercial criteria, but he was not about to stop there. His observations of the United States has been a catalyst, and his insatiable curiosity had found a well of inspiration in the country's outsized nature. Dior made use of everything he saw. He exercised his architect's eye. He observed like an urban planner. He thought like a sociologist and closed like a businessman. In his memoir, he described in meticulous detail each city he visited. The faces of different cities fascinated him, but the lifestyles are what he observed in detail. He noticed everything and decided to extend his stay when he realized how much he could learn from it. The only thing that alarmed him in the course, he speaks himself, what alarmed me the most in the course of my stay in the United States was the habit of spending enormous sums of money in order to achieve so little real luxury. The American woman prefers 3 new dresses to 1 beautiful one and does not linger over a choice, knowing perfectly that, well, that her fancy will be of short duration. Yet, we still often say in France that American women do not know how to buy. Here we buy something because we think it's beautiful. Why is America, in essence, so rich, such an advocate of inexpensive fashion? But what was the message behind the success of the new look? A single style had been capable of triggering a massive shift in opinion and of sparkling the kind of media phenomenon that until now had been reserved to the performing arts, the cinema, major sporting events, such as the Olympic Games. Dior concluded that there must be something unique about the tradition of French style and taste, and it strengthened his desire to establish a strategy of commercial distribution specific to the American market and to make the most of its advantage. He conceptualized this notion, which we call today now, we know what we call it branding. Dior was in the process of inventing that concept and knowing that what you sell is not a dress. What you sell is an idea, it's a dream, it's an idea of savoir-faire and taste. So he was so far advanced on his generation and now this generation. While in his United States, Dior telephoned his manager in Paris about his plans, explaining that they must open a high fashion ready-to-wear house in New York where the clothes which were designed could be reproduced for the mass market and be suited for clients on both coasts. The concept of licensing had already begun to take shape in his mind. And when the couturier disembarked in Cherbourg, where Jacques White and Jacques Humbert, his boyfriend, were waiting for him with his driver, he had caught America's entrepreneurial fever, and his contagious energy and he has come so far from his dreams of a small fashion house. There was no turning back now. The creative energies of the Americans encouraged me toward further creative enterprises in my core. And the year after, I want to shorten it a bit, the year after, Christian Dior America, I've got to find where it is, Christian Dior Fifth Avenue was opened on November 8, 1948. The lucky number 8 had been chosen intentionally. Lavish bouquets of flowers greeted the guests who had been invited to view Christian Dior's first collection created in the United States. And New York, Marlene Dietrich came with her entourage, dripping with diamonds. Francis Weiss, the workshop head, hired in New York, recalled the scene with emotion. We loved Dior. He was a great man. We worked like crazy for him. Voila, I think we can finish on this particular, there are many more things to say, but we can finish on this particular wonderful period and time when there was a collaboration between two countries, could actually find, a rich experience between themselves and contributed to, in fact, changing the face of the world. Suddenly there was gaiety, there was the families in the streets with nice dresses and being happy to be together. Voila, I think we will probably now give you time to do more interesting things. And
maybe some questions and answers.
There may be questions and answers. I'm delighted. I'm going to stay with you as long as you wish. I just didn't want to impose too much on you.
So Melissa, do we have any questions in the chat? I'm not seeing.
I don't think so.
I think you were so mesmerizing, Marie-France.
I'm not mesmerizing. It's him. It's just I'm so pleased to tell that story. I mean, you understand. I mean, I have no reserve about saying that I'm very admirative of Dior because I think it's an extraordinary story. There's much more to tell about him. I mean, the book is 458 pages, and even then I have not told everything, but there was a good period in the last year or so where I was able to collaborate with the Heritage Service of Dior, and we found masses of things on him, letters, pictures, correspondences, and design that had been sent to him by with all this array of friends, Marie-Laure de Noailles, by all kinds of people. We even fell on the book. He bought himself a house in the south of France, which is very beautiful, that you must think of asking to visit. And I will try and make sure this is possible for you. In the Col Noir, next to Cagnan, he bought a house which he completely redesigned, redecorated, which is splendid, restored by Dior. And what was I going to say? Yes, and we even fell on the guest list. The books, the livres d'invités, the guest books. And so I found extraordinary things like Chagall that came to spend 2 days with him. It was amazing, the number of the outreach in his life. When we were preparing this lecture with Kate, we both agreed that what really defines Dior are 3 things. First of all, he had an infallible eye for beauty, an extraordinary sense of friendship, and third, that we have just demonstrated now by this last piece, that he was a brilliant entrepreneurial spirit, with no background, no learning, no business school, no training. It was just his sense of absorbing what he discovered in America that created the effect for him of a business school, an American business school. And just to finish on that subject, the difference between the perspective in Paris and the perspective in America is absolutely vast. There was no business analysis done of the Dior business while Dior was in Paris. In America, there was an extremely thought out and very, very well developed analysis, which was made by women who were daily in 6 installments, which I have. It didn't even interest the French. It did not produce because the French, there's something very superficial. Fashion for a very long time was considered something which was just superficial. But Christian Dior created a business which was a model afterwards. And when you think that the Dior empire, it was called empire at the time, but the Dior business was expanded in his period until he died in 1957 for the 10 years. Yes, the other extraordinary thing in his destiny is that he was able to dedicate to the world a business model working that all of the people benefited afterwards just for a period of 10 years. The other thing also, which was his great merit, is that most designers are so proud of themselves that they forget about organizing the succession and determining and raising the person who is going to continue the legacy. And Christian Dior was the opposite. When Saint Laurent was hired, he had no particular sympathy for Saint Laurent, whom he found a bit too mannered, too complicated and whatever, but nevertheless, he immediately admired and he recognized his talent. And at a certain time, towards the end, before, I think it was in 1956 that this happened, he spoke to Jacques Rouet, his manager, and he said, you know, in the last collection, 40 of the dresses of the collection were made by Saint Laurent. You have to put him forward. You have to tell the press. You have to show this young man because he's our future. This had never been in the story of French couture. This doesn't exist.
So I think, Marie-France, we should end here. We've been so thrilled to have you for an hour and a half. I think, Kate, if you could send us a link. I think there are a lot of people that were very interested in maybe seeing some examples of his fashion that he did in the U.S.
Yes,
or in France. Just if there's yeah.
Yes, they're on the slides, and we have not showed them because I shifted to the two new look stories, which I thought were so.
Melissa, you has that in the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
I don't think we have any time, and I think that people are signing out. So maybe Melissa, we can figure out a way to show people some of the fashion, or Kate and I, you can work that out because we can respond to everybody who's signed up for this. But we thank you so much, and I hope everyone buys the book, and I hope to see you in New York at Resolute when you're here in New York as well.
I look forward to seeing you.
If everybody could unmute and give Marie-France Pochna a great applause.
Same to you. Same to you. Same to you. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you so much.
Merci beaucoup.
Okay. Bye-bye.